Welcome back to the GCSE Maths Pro YouTube channel. Today's video is the second part of the perimeter topic, where we'll be looking at finding the circumference of circles and also the perimeter of semicircles. So this first page is for you to write down or take a screenshot of. We've got the formula for the circumference of a circle. Now here I do actually have two formulas. They are exactly the same thing, right? So they're both for the circumference. It just depends on which one you personally prefer to memorize. So you've got either 2 pi r, where we're focusing on the radius, or pi d, which is the diameter. I personally prefer to go with pi d, because when we're looking at area of a circle, which we'll come on to in the next series, the area of a circle is pi r squared, and I just personally feel like pi r squared and 2 pi r are quite similar, and I don't want to get them mixed up. So I personally prefer to have the area as pi r squared, and then the circumference as pi d, pi times diameter. But it's completely up to you. You might prefer 2 pi r. It's literally a personal choice. They're both exactly the same thing, because obviously 2 times the radius is the diameter, isn't it? So it's exactly the same thing. Whichever of these two formulas you prefer, that's the one that you go with. So we're just going to jump straight into it. It says work out the circumference of these circles. I've written down both of the formulas up here so you can choose. So I'm going to be using pi d, but you can obviously work it out with 2 pi r and just check if you've got the same answer. So the first one, we've got 8 centimeters, which you can see is the radius, isn't it? So in terms of doing pi d, I know that if the radius is 8, the diameter is going to be 2 times 8. Now, I don't necessarily write this down, I kind of just do this in my head, but just so you can see where I've got it from. The diameter is actually then 16, isn't it? All the way across is the diameter. So then to find the circumference, which I'll put C for circumference, I do pi times 16, and then I'll put it in my calculator. So pi times 16, obviously it's 16 pi, but as a decimal, let's say to one decimal place, is 50.3. Okay, so that's the circumference. Now the circumference is just a very specific word of saying the perimeter. We're saying what is around the outside of the circle, okay, the length of the outside of the circle. With circles we just use the word circumference instead of perimeter, but the logic is the same thing. So for the second one, I'm working out the circumference. Again, my diameter is going to be double the 19, which should give me 38 centimeters. As I said, I would probably just do that bit in my head, and then I know it's pi times 38, which on my calculator will give me 119.4 to one decimal place as well. Okay. It's again just centimeters because it's a one-dimensional measurement, isn't it? It's not two-dimensional. Okay, so as you can see with these ones, we've still got the same question, work out the circumference of the circles. However, we're now given this measurement all the way across the circle, which is obviously then the diameter. So in this case, I can just go straight into doing pi times the diameter. So pi times, in this case, 10, and then I'll put it into my calculator. Pi times 10, again obviously 10 pi, but if you press the SD button here, just above the delete button, it will convert it into a decimal for you. So to one decimal place we've got 31.4. The second one, same again, the 3 centimeters in this case is the whole of the diameter, isn't it? So I just need to do pi times 3. Pi times 3 is 9.4. I've just rounded these all to one decimal place. Obviously, you double check what your question says in the exam. They will tell you how to round it. So that is literally it for the circumference of a circle. Just remember one of those two formulas and then make sure you double check have I got the radius or the diameter. The next bit we're going to look at is working out the perimeter of these semicircles. So we're using perimeter now because obviously it's only half of a circle. The perimeter of any shape, which if you've seen the previous video, you'll know what the perimeter means anyway. The perimeter is just the outside sides all added together. Okay, so all the sides added together. Now, in this case of a semicircle, we've actually got 2 sides, haven't we? If I go back quickly, a circle as a whole is just one side, isn't it? That's why I just worked out the circumference and that was it. For a semicircle, I've got this arc, which is obviously half of a circle. Then I've also got this straight line here. That's 2 sides that I need to add together. So that's why we're calling it the perimeter now, because it's not just the circumference anymore, is it? In terms of a circle, it's half of the circumference plus another side. So firstly, I'm going to work out the circumference of, if you imagine this circle to be the whole thing, if you imagine it to be the whole thing, we're still going to do 2 pi r or pi d, whichever you prefer. So in this case, I've got the radius, which is 7, so I would do the circumference pi times 14, because obviously 2 times 7 is 14. So pi times 14 gives me 43.98. So in this case, I'm going to write down a couple of decimal places because I've not got the final answer yet. So I'll put 43.98 down. Now, the only thing to be bearing in mind in this as well is that obviously that's the whole circumference if that were to be a whole circle. We've actually only got half of the circle, haven't we? We've got this arc, which is obviously exactly half. So therefore, I actually need to take my answer and divide it by 2 because I only want half of that circumference, don't I? So just remember, if it's a semicircle, we only want half. So it's going to take my answer here and just directly press divide by 2 so it copies the answer. So I don't have to lose any decimals. Obviously it's telling me it's 7 pi, but if I were to put it as a decimal, we've got 21.99 roughly. And again, this isn't the last bit, is it? So that's the arc part. Okay, so that's the green bit, but the perimeter is, as we said at the start, including this other side. Now, this side here, they've given us the radius, which is halfway, but we know from one side of the circumference to the other side of the circumference is the diameter, isn't it, if it goes straight through the middle? So I know that this is the diameter, which, as we said, is 2 lots of the radius. So my total perimeter, I'm going to just put it up here, perimeter is obviously the 21.99 plus the diameter, so 7 plus 7, or if you want to just write it as 14 directly as the diameter, that's fine. So we're going to add those. So my answer plus 7 plus another 7 gives me 35.99. Now this is the final answer, so I'm going to round it. If I round it to 1 decimal place, that would actually become 36, wouldn't it? So I've got 36.0 to 1 decimal place. So just double check when you've got a semicircle that you have not only just worked out the circumference, you've also halved it, but also you've added the diameter on there. So let's do it with the second one. If you feel confident enough that you have got the idea, obviously feel free to pause the video and try out the second one yourself. So the second one, we are actually given the diameter, aren't we, in the first place? So the circumference is pi times the diameter, pi times 21, which gives us 65.97. Just going to write down a couple of those decimals. Now, as we said before, it's a semicircle. We only want half of that. We don't want the whole circumference. So I'm going to do 65.97 divided by 2. So just take my answer and go divide by 2, which gives me 32.98 ... I'm writing down a couple of decimal places because the rest of them are still in my calculator. I've not got rid of them. I've left them in my calculator. So that is the arc. Now, as we said before, we're going to need to add on the other side, which is the diameter. In this case, it's just been given as 21, isn't it? So I don't need to add it twice because it is already the diameter. So I'm going to have my 32.98, which is the arc, plus 21, which is my diameter. There we go, in yellow. So taking my answer, I'm just going to put directly plus 21 and it will copy all of those decimals. So I've got 53.9867 ... Now I'm going to round it. Again, if I round it to 1 decimal place, actually it's going to round up to 54.0, isn't it? And that's it. So it feels like a bit of a trick question, these ones, because they're semicircles, but just remember, divide your circumference by 2 because you obviously only want half of it. And don't forget to add on the diameter at the end because it is another side to the semicircle. And that's it. So we've got 54 for that question. Okay, this one's very similar. We now have a quarter of a circle and we're going to work out the perimeter. So if you feel confident enough, feel free to pause the video and give this one a go based on what we just did with the semicircle. If not, then we're going to go through it anyway. So in this case, the quarter of a circle actually has 3 sides, doesn't it? So it's got this arc, it's got, and then 2, this is obviously a radius, and that's a radius, isn't it? So I know that that one's also 4.5 there. Just going to label that. So I'm going to work out the arc first. We're still going to work out the circumference if you imagine that to be a whole circle. So we've got pi times the diameter. Now the diameter is obviously double the radius. So 4.5 times 2 is 9, isn't it? So we're going to need to work out what pi times 9 is. And that should give us 28.27. I'm going to write down. Now in this case, that's again obviously the whole circumference of the whole circle. This one we're not going to half it because we've not got a semicircle, have we? We've actually got a quarter of a circle. So in that case, I'm just going to divide it by 4. I only want 1/4 of the whole thing, don't I? So therefore, 28.27 in this case divided by 4. So take your answer from that, just put directly divide and then 4. It will copy all of those decimals for you. So we've got 7.068 ... Just going to write down a couple of the decimals. So that's the length of the arc. So just double check, do I need to find the circumference? Do I need to half the circumference? Do I need to divide it by 4? In this case, it was divided by 4 because as you can see, it said that it's 1/4 of a circle, but obviously we've got this right angle here, and 90 degrees we should know is 1/4 of a circle. It's 1/4 of 360 degrees, isn't it? So that's that bit, but then again, remember we've got 2 other sides we need to now add on to get the whole perimeter. So the perimeter as a whole is obviously the 7.068 ... plus 2 lots of 4.5, as those are the other 2 sides that we're missing. So I'm just going to put add, so it copies all of those decimals again. 4.5 plus another 4.5, 16.068 ... Now I'm going to round it to 1 decimal place. That would give me 16.1. And that's it, there's your answer. Okay, so we only really have one formula in terms of whichever one of these you want to remember. We have one formula for the circumference, but you can use it to then find out a semicircle, a quarter circle, and things like that. So here we've got the circumference of the circle is 100 pi centimeters. Work out the radius x. So in this case, we've actually been given the answer in terms of they've given us the circumference. They want us to work backwards to find out the radius. So what I'm going to do is I like to set it up as an equation because you might be happy to reverse this process quite easily just off the top of your head. I like to visualize it. So I like to say, right, if I were to work out the circumference, I would do pi times the diameter. And now in this case, that equals 100 pi, doesn't it? I know that. Now I've got this equation, I just want to solve it. So in this case, I want to find out what the diameter is. All I want to do in this case is get rid of the pi's. That's all that's in the way of the diameter, isn't it? So I want to divide by pi on both sides. That's how I'm going to cancel it out and move it across. Those basically both just cancel, don't they? So I get diameter is 100. Now the only thing to be careful with here is that they have asked for the radius. So I have to just go therefore. I know that the radius is half of a diameter, isn't it? So I can just divide that by 2. Actually, let's put radius is 100 divided by 2, half of the diameter, which is then 50 centimeters. Now you might have used the formula 2 pi r here, which I'll actually show you as an example. I'm just going to use a different colour. So let's say you did 2 pi r is equal to 100 pi. Now again, I would probably divide by pi first because it's effectively cancelling it out, isn't it? That's just a bit easier. So divide by pi. You can divide directly by 2 pi if you want, if you do it on your calculator, but just to show you where it comes from. Cancel out the pi's because they're both on each side. So I get 2r, 2 times the radius is 100, and then obviously at that point you go, right, well clearly I need to then divide by 2, don't I, to get just the radius. So you see how you get the same answer. It doesn't matter which of these 2 formulas you've used, you'll get the same answer. The radius is 50. So that is everything you need to know on the circumference of circles and the perimeter of semicircles. The next video is on arc length more specifically, so we'll be looking at circle sectors, working out the arc length and a bit of perimeter in there as well. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe, and please leave down below any questions or comments that you might have.